A stone wall can hide a civilization's greatest secret. Scattered across our world are massive ancient boundary walls, colossal structures whose true purpose has vanished with the people who built them. By the end of this exploration, you will see history not as a solved puzzle, but as a living mystery where every answer leads to a deeper question. We will confront silent ramparts in the Amazon rainforest and earthwork serpents on the Ukrainian steppe, asking why they were really built. Why would a society invest generations of labor into a barrier that seems to guard nothing? These are not simple fences, but profound enigmas carved into the earth itself. What does it say about us that we are still trying to decipher the ambitions of the forgotten? A mystery begins with a contradiction. Think of the walls of ancient Rome, their purpose clear in the writings they left behind. They were built to defend a bustling city, a function we understand instantly. Now shift your view to a lonely ridge in a windswept landscape, where a grass-covered earthwork runs for miles toward a horizon with no city in sight. This is where the real puzzle starts. The wall itself is not mysterious. It is the silence around it that speaks volumes. An ancient boundary wall transforms into a true enigma when its very existence seems to defy logic. When its scale is so vast, it would have required thousands of workers for years. Yet we find no large settlement nearby to command that labor. When its construction is sophisticated, with precise angles and deep ditches, yet it sits in a location with no apparent military or economic value. When it simply does not fit the story we have written about that place and time, archaeologists like Dr. Rebecca Jones point out that these structures force a fundamental question. They make us reconsider what territory meant to people without written records, how power was projected across a landscape, and how communities defined themselves against the unknown. To identify these global mysteries, we look for three key clues. First, monumental scale. This is not a simple property line, but a project of staggering ambition that reshapes the land itself. Second, ambiguous technique. The method of building often seems experimental or uniquely adapted to local materials, leaving no clear cultural fingerprint. And third, a puzzling relationship with the environment. The wall may cut across natural pathways instead of reinforcing them, or enclose an area that seems empty. It is this jarring disconnect between the immense effort and the elusive reason that captures our imagination. The wall stands as a statement, but in a language we have forgotten how to read. This is the nature of the enigma we are about to explore, a tour of improbability written in stone and soil. 39 miles of turf and timber once cut a sharp line across the narrow waste of Scotland. This was the Antonine Wall, the Roman Empire's northernmost frontier, a brief and bold stroke on the map, commissioned by Emperor Antoninus Pius around the year 142. It was a statement in earth and grass, crowned with a towering wooden palisade and fronted by a ditch so deep it was called the Vallum. Yet within 20 years the legions pulled back, leaving this expensive barrier to the weather and the locals. The question hangs in the Scottish mist. Why commit such staggering resources to a project with such a short lifespan? The wall itself whispers clues of its rushed and troubled existence. Unlike the solid, enduring stone of Hadrian's wall to the south, the Antonine Wall was built primarily from turf blocks, a faster but far less permanent material. Its forts, while impressive, show signs of being laid out in a hurry, with modifications happening even as the ramparts were being raised. This was not the work of an empire settling in for the long haul, but of one pushing a boundary quickly and perhaps recklessly. Historian Dr. David Breeze has described it as potentially a vanity project, a monumental effort by a new emperor to outshine his predecessor, Trajan. by securing a conquest that had eluded even him. The political message was clear. Rome could march north and build a wall wherever it wished, but the practical reality on the ground was far more difficult. The land beyond the wall was not empty. It was home to fierce, mobile tribes like the Caledonians, for whom the dense forests and rolling hills were a natural advantage. Holding this new, narrower frontier required a massive and constant military presence in a challenging, wet climate, far from reliable supply lines. Every sack of grain, every nail, every replacement soldier had to be brought up from the south. The logistical strain must have been immense, so we are left with competing possibilities. Was this a genuine, if over-optimistic, attempt to permanently annex new territory that simply failed? Or was it always a grand strategic bluff, a show of force meant to intimidate the northern tribes and secure a buffer zone, never intended to be held forever? The abandonment itself is part of the mystery. Evidence suggests it was not a panicked retreat but a deliberate, organized withdrawal. The forts were systematically dismantled, anything of value taken south. This careful retreat implies a high-level decision, likely from Rome itself, that the cost of holding the line was no longer worth the benefit. The frontier was recalibrated to the more defensible, stone-built solidity of Hadrian's wall. The Antonine wall stands, then, as a monument to imperial ambition meeting its practical limits. It challenges the image of an invincible, ever-expanding Rome, revealing instead an empire that could overreach, experiment, and then quietly contract. Its fleeting presence on the landscape is a powerful reminder that even the mightiest walls are ultimately subject to the calculus of power, distance, and the will of the people on both sides of the ditch. Far to the east, the horizon itself seems to have been stitched into the earth. Across the sweeping plains of Ukraine, colossal ridges and trenches curve for hundreds of miles, forming what later generations would call the Serpent's walls. These are not walls of stone, but of soil and grass, earthen giants so vast their full, sinuous shapes are only truly comprehended from the air. Built by countless hands over centuries, they represent one of the largest and least understood construction projects of the ancient world. The core mystery is twofold. In an era before written records in this region, who possessed the authority to organize such a staggering feat of labor, and what pressing need did they believe it answered? Some scholars point to early Slavic tribes consolidating their territory. Others suggest the nomadic Bulgars, or the emerging power of the Kievan Rus as the architects. Each potential builder comes with a different story, a different enemy in mind. Were these ramparts a desperate shield against relentless cavalry armies from the open steppe, like the fierce Pechenegs or the powerful Khazars? The defensive logic seems compelling. A deep ditch fronting a high berm would have slowed down horsemen, creating a kill zone where defenders could rally. Sections of the walls cleverly integrate with the natural landscape, using riverbanks and marshlands to anchor their ends, funneling any potential attack into predetermined corridors. Yet, other segments of the walls defy simple military explanation. They run in multiple, sometimes parallel lines, creating zones rather than a single, impregnable barrier. Some embankments lack evidence of permanent garrisons or fortified gates. This has led to an alternative vision. Perhaps these were not walls against armies, but boundaries for economies. They could have demarcated the grazing lands of settled communities from the open steppe, controlling the seasonal movement of herds and people. They might have served as elevated roadways, as territorial markers between chieftains, or as custom lines to regulate and tax the lucrative trade routes that crisscrossed this region. The very scale of the earthworks suggests a society with a deep, enduring need to impose order on a landscape that offered both immense wealth and constant fluidity. The Serpent's walls are a lesson in humility. They remind us that a structure can be monumental, visible from space, and yet its most fundamental truths, the names of its builders, the sound of the commands that raised it can be utterly lost to time. We are left staring at the grassy waves of these ancient ramparts, listening to the wind where once there were voices, plans, and a purpose that reshaped a continent. Beneath the emerald veil of the Amazon, a different kind of wall lies sleeping. For centuries, the dense rainforest canopy guarded a secret, creating the illusion of an untouched primeval world. Then, light detection and ranging technology, or LiDAR, peered through the leaves. It revealed a stunning geometric tapestry etched into the earth below, not walls of stone but of soil itself. Vast, precise circles, perfect squares, and long, straight embankments form a hidden network across the basin. This discovery shattered a long-held myth. The pre-Columbian Amazon was not a passive wilderness. It was a profoundly managed landscape, a garden on a continental scale crafted by sophisticated societies. The immediate question is as pressing as the jungle humidity. What were these earthen enclosures for? At first glance, the deep ditches and raised banks looked defensive, perhaps protecting large, settled communities from conflict. Yet, many of these formations are found in areas without obvious signs of major, permanent warfare. Another possibility is that they were ceremonial centers, sacred spaces where communities gathered for rituals, their geometric perfection mirroring a cosmic order. But perhaps the most transformative theory comes from researchers like Dr. Jonas Gregorio de Souza, who suggests these works were multifunctional masterpieces of landscape engineering. The ditches may have managed seasonal floodwaters, creating raised dry areas for homes and gardens, while the channels below cultivated fish and fertile silt. The embankments could have marked social territories, guided movement, or even served as astronomical alignments. They were likely both practical and profoundly symbolic, structuring daily life and spiritual belief within a single, integrated design. These are not walls that simply keep something out. They are walls that carefully curated an entire way of life, weaving society into the very fabric of the forest. This revelation forces a humbling re-evaluation. It asks us to see the Amazon not as a blank space on ancient maps, but as a heartland of innovation, where civilizations thrived by sculpting the earth itself into a sustainable and breathtaking work of art. The ambition of the Amazon's earthworks is matched only by the sheer military engineering of a distant desert frontier. Stretching 121 miles across northern Iran, from the green foothills of the Caspian Sea into arid plains, lies a structure of breathtaking sophistication, the Great Wall of Gorgon. Its local name, the Red Snake, comes from the distinctive color of its fired bricks, a rust-colored ribbon laid across the landscape by the powerful Sasanian Empire. This was not a simple barrier. It was an integrated military machine, arguably one of the most advanced of the ancient world. A deep, wide ditch fronted the wall. Along its length stood more than 30 fortified garrison posts, a parallel water canal, an astonishing feat of hydraulic engineering, ran alongside it, ensuring a reliable supply for the thousands of troops stationed there. Estimates suggest a permanent garrison of 30,000 soldiers, a staggering commitment of human resources. The presumed threat is clear: nomadic groups from the northern steppes, whose mobility and raids were a constant challenge to settled empires. Yet this very clarity deepens the mystery. Why here? The Sasanian Empire had other frontiers, other potential threats. So why pour such an immense concentration of wealth, technology, and manpower into this specific strip of land? The wall's extreme cost and technological prowess seem disproportionate if it was merely a defensive line. Its construction speaks of more than just fear. It speaks of a deliberate, overwhelming statement of imperial power and control. The canal itself is a key to the puzzle. It did not just provide drinking water, it enabled agriculture, supporting the large garrison locally and reducing the crippling logistics of supplying such a remote force from distant heartlands. This transforms the wall from a passive shield into an active, self-sustaining colony on the frontier. It was designed not for a temporary campaign, but for a permanent, dominating presence. The strategic logic seems to be one of absolute denial, to completely shut down a corridor of movement, to transform a fluid frontier into a rigid, impermeable border. Yet scholars still debate the full calculation. Was the steppe threat on this border uniquely severe? Was the region behind the wall particularly valuable, perhaps for agriculture or trade routes the empire was desperate to secure? Or was this monumental project also about imperial prestige, a physical manifestation of the king's power meant to awe both subjects and enemies alike? The red snake represents the zenith of ancient frontier military architecture, a system where every brick and every channel of water served a calculated purpose. But the full depth of that calculation, the precise reason this spot demanded such an extreme solution, remains locked within the sun-baked bricks, a testament to an empire's will to master its world. A wall does not always need to stop movement. Sometimes its purpose is to direct it with perfect control. Across the narrow isthmus of Corinth in Greece, the ancient Greeks engineered a solution to a geographical problem that redefines our idea of a boundary. This is the Diolkos, a paved roadway with parallel stone walls forming a grooved track, built around 600 BC. For centuries, this was the ancient world's most famous shortcut. Ships, both merchant vessels and warships, were unloaded, placed on wooden cradles, and dragged by teams of men and animals across the 4-mile-wide isthmus. This arduous process allowed them to bypass the treacherous, weeks-long sea journey around the southern Peloponnese, a voyage infamous for its shipwrecks. On the surface, its function seems clear, a brilliant piece of practical logistics, but look deeper, and the Diolkos presents a fascinating mystery about intent and control. It was a monumental, linear construction, a man-made channel across the natural landscape. But was it primarily a tool of commerce or of war? The economic argument is powerful. Controlling this vital shortcut meant controlling trade between the Aegean and Ionian seas. The city-state of Corinth could levy substantial tolls on merchants desperate to save time and avoid peril, funneling immense wealth into its coffers. It was a monopoly on movement, a guaranteed source of revenue carved in stone. Yet the military implications are equally compelling. Imagine the strategic advantage for Corinth or for any power controlling the trackway. A naval fleet could be transferred from one sea to another in a matter of days, appearing where an enemy least expected. This was not just about moving goods, it was about projecting power with startling speed. The Diolkos forces us to expand our understanding of ancient boundaries. It was not a barrier meant to keep people out, but a specialized corridor meant to guide very specific, incredibly valuable objects through a precise point. It functioned as a valve in the bloodstream of maritime activity, one that could be opened or closed, taxed or weaponized by those in charge. This structure blurs every category. It is part wall, defining the only acceptable path. It is part road, facilitating travel. And it is part machine, a complex system of labor, engineering, and logistics working in concert. The true purpose of the Diolkos likely wove together both commerce and military strategy, each motive strengthening the other. It stands as a testament to a different kind of power, not the power to exclude, but the power to manage the flow of the world itself, turning a geographical obstacle into a source of immense control. So how do we move from staring at a silent wall to hearing its story? The journey from mystery to understanding is guided by modern archaeology, a field that has transformed from treasure hunting into a precise, multi-faceted science. It begins not with a shovel, but with a question. Archaeologists approach these colossal walls like detectives at a vast, cold crime scene, where the clues are often invisible to the naked eye. The first step is to see what has been hidden for centuries. Technologies like ground-penetrating radar send pulses into the earth, mapping buried foundations, post holes, or even hidden chambers without moving a single stone. In dense jungles like those covering the Amazon, LiDAR technology is revolutionary. Mounted on aircraft, it uses laser pulses to digitally strip away the blanket of vegetation, revealing the geometric perfection of ancient earthworks hidden below, patterns impossible to discern from the ground. But seeing the structure is only half the battle. We need to understand the world it existed within. This is where specialists like archaeobotanists come in. By analyzing ancient pollen and seeds preserved in soil layers, they can reconstruct the environment. Was the land around the wall cleared for farming, or was it dense forest? This simple fact can tilt the interpretation from a defensive outpost to a ceremonial clearing. Every technique adds a layer of data, a new color to the picture. Dating is perhaps the most crucial and often the most tricky piece of the puzzle. Radiocarbon dating analyzes organic material like charcoal from an ancient cooking fire at the site, giving a range of years. For earthen walls, a method called optically stimulated luminescence can date the last time a soil sample was exposed to sunlight, telling us when it was buried to form the rampart. Yet, even with this technological arsenal, interpretation is never purely objective. As many field archaeologists note, our reading of the evidence is theory-laden. A researcher focused on military history will naturally examine a wall for strategic vantage points and armories. A landscape archaeologist, however, might study how the wall aligns with celestial events or ancient pathways, seeing a symbolic boundary for the living and the spiritual realms. The process is meticulous and slow, involving extensive survey, followed by targeted, almost surgical, excavation of key points like a gateway or a corner junction. Each fragment of pottery, each tool, each seed is a word in a language we are still learning to speak. The frustration and the fascination is that these methods provide pieces of a vast puzzle, but the box top with the complete image has been lost to time. We gather data, we build models, we propose theories, but the final, satisfying click of a perfect fit remains elusive, urging science to look deeper and think broader. The silent stones and earthworks before us are not just engineering problems, they are profound cultural statements. To grasp their purpose, we must attempt a difficult leap across time, to see the world through the eyes of those who ordered them built. What vision, what collective dream was powerful enough to command the labor of thousands for years, even generations? The most compelling theories suggest these walls were as much about shaping a worldview as they were about shaping a landscape. Anthropologists like Professor Timothy in Gold describe such monumental acts as world-making. A society does not just build within its environment, it builds its environment to reflect and reinforce its deepest beliefs. Consider the psychological landscape. A wall could certainly rise from fear, a tangible barrier against a very real threat of conflict. But it might also spring from a desire for prestige, a ruler's need to carve their name into the earth itself, creating a legacy meant to outlast stone. Perhaps the most powerful driver was a need to impose order. For an ancient society, the wilderness beyond their fields was not just empty land, it was a realm of chaos, of unknown spirits, of the untamed. By raising a massive, straight, deliberate boundary, they were drawing a line across that chaos. They were declaring, here on this side is our world, a place of law, cultivation, and cosmic understanding. The wall materialized that idea. It transformed an abstract belief into something you could see, touch, and walk alongside. This is why a single structure can defy a single explanation. A wall that kept out raiders also kept in a sense of identity. A ditch that marked a ceremonial space also managed the flow of water. The physical labor of construction itself may have been a ritual, binding the community together in a shared, sacred task that defined them as a people. The stone and earth are heavy, but the ideas they carried were heavier still. The most immediate answer that comes to mind is simple defense. When we see a massive wall, our modern minds instinctively think of a shield, a barrier raised against a threat. This military logic is deeply rooted in history and seems perfectly straightforward. A successful defensive frontier needs specific, practical features. It requires a commanding position on the landscape, offering a clear field of view to spot approaching forces. It needs fortified gates to control passage, and a system of towers or forts to house a garrison ready to respond. Most importantly, it needs a credible, sustained military presence. Without soldiers to patrol it, even the grandest wall is just a speed bump. We can take this checklist and apply it to our mysterious walls, and the results are fascinatingly mixed. The Antonine Wall in Scotland fits the defensive model remarkably well. It had a deep northern ditch, a rampart built with military precision, and a chain of forts housing troops. Its design speaks the clear language of Roman frontier control. Similarly, the Great Wall of Gorgon, with its 30 forts and sophisticated supporting canal, is a masterpiece of military engineering, clearly built to maintain a large, permanent garrison against northern incursions. These walls align with the classic defense hypothesis. Yet, when we look at the sprawling Serpent's walls of the steppe, the picture blurs. While immense, many sections lack obvious, permanent garrison points. They seem more like long, imposing barriers across the landscape than carefully manned defensive lines. This is where the defense hypothesis expands into the realm of psychological warfare. A wall does not have to be constantly manned to be effective. Its sheer physical presence, the sheer statement of it, can be a powerful deterrent. It projects organized power and territorial claim. It tells any potential raider or rival that the people on the other side are capable of monumental, coordinated effort. The wall itself is a warning. So we must consider defense as both a physical function and a towering symbol. When we compare a definitively military wall like Hadrian's Wall, with its documented garrisons, supply depots, and clear defensive architecture, to the more enigmatic Amazonian geoglyphs, the military explanation begins to fray. Those earthen enclosures, with their wide openings and intricate geometric shapes, do not readily suggest a need for archers on the ramparts. They force us to ask, if not for stopping armies, what other powerful human needs could possibly justify such immense and enduring labor? But what if the greatest threat these walls were built to repel was not an army but chaos itself? This leads us to a profoundly different interpretation, one that lives not on the battlefield but in the human mind. The symbolic boundary hypothesis suggests these colossal structures were less about physical defense and more about defining reality. They were walls of the mind, monumental declarations meant to impose order on a world that could feel untamed and unpredictable. In this view, a wall does not just separate us from them, it separates the sacred from the profane, the realm of the ancestors from that of the living, or the ordered, cultivated world from the wild, spiritual unknown. It materializes ideas that a society holds most dear, turning abstract belief into undeniable, permanent stone and earth. Consider the Amazonian geoglyphs once more. From a military standpoint, their low earthen banks and often wide openings seem impractical, but as ceremonial spaces, their logic becomes captivating. These precise geometric forms, circles, squares, and lines, could have served as vast ritual enclosures. The walls were not for keeping enemies out, but for containing spiritual energy within, marking a place where the community gathered to connect with forces greater than themselves. They transformed a section of the forest into a sacred diagram, a permanent imprint of cosmology upon the land. This shifts our entire perspective. We are no longer looking at fortifications, but at the physical architecture of belief. On a more societal level, such walls could also demarcate profound social divisions. They might have separated the restricted, elite quarters of a ruler or priestly class from the common populace, making social hierarchy visible and unassailable. Or they could have traced the ancestral boundaries between clans, serving as eternal, immutable markers of identity and territory. Building a wall of this scale is an ultimate expression of political authority. It proclaims, "I command the labor of thousands, I reshape the very earth, this land and its people are under my control." The wall becomes the proof of the ruler's power, a legitimacy built not just through proclamation, but through undeniable collective effort. This hypothesis asks us to step into a different worldview. For many ancient cultures, the landscape was alive with meaning. A river, a mountain, or a forest grove could be a deity or an ancestor. In such a world, a boundary is not just a property line, it is a moral and spiritual frontier. A wall might be built to keep out malevolent spirits, to protect the spiritual purity of a community, or to mark the limit of a king's divinely sanctioned rule. The effort required to build it was not a burdensome cost, but a sacred duty, an act of devotion or communal identity that strengthened the social fabric with every basket of earth moved. From this angle, the true purpose of these silent sentinels was to make the invisible visible, to carve humanity's deepest fears, beliefs, and social structures into the enduring face of the earth. Yet another perspective shifts the focus from spiritual realms to the fundamental necessities of survival. Perhaps these vast constructions were not about repelling invaders or defining sacred space, but about securing the very foundation of life itself. This is the resource control hypothesis, which frames these monumental walls as the ultimate tools of economic and environmental management. In this view, the primary adversary was not a foreign army, but scarcity, unpredictability, and the relentless challenge of sustaining a large population in a demanding landscape. The builders emerged not as paranoid warriors, but as pragmatic engineers and visionary resource managers on a colossal scale. Consider the practical challenges an ancient society faced. How do you protect your vital croplands from wandering herds of wild animals or from the livestock of neighboring groups? How do you clearly demarcate exclusive hunting grounds or fishing territories to prevent conflict? How do you control and defend access to a critical resource like a salt deposit, a metal ore vein, or the only reliable freshwater spring for miles? A massive linear earthwork or wall provides a definitive, unambiguous answer. It is a permanent, unmistakable line on the land that says, "The resources on this side are ours." The evidence for this is often woven into the very design of the structures. Take the Wall of Gorgon, the red snake of Persia. Running parallel to much of its length is a sophisticated canal. This wasn't merely a moat for defense, it was an irrigation channel, a lifeline. It transformed the wall from a simple barrier into the spine of an integrated agricultural system, designed to feed the large garrison stationed there and possibly to cultivate the land immediately inside the empire's border. The wall protected not just people but the very infrastructure of their sustenance. In the Amazon, this hypothesis finds compelling resonance. The geometric earthworks revealed by Lydia may have been masterpieces of environmental engineering. Their ditches and banks could have managed the complex hydrology of the rainforest, controlling seasonal flooding to protect settlements, creating raised dry areas for habitation, and even forming productive aquaculture ponds. The arranged landscapes might have enhanced soil fertility through intentional mulching and waste management, turning areas of poor rainforest soil into sustained gardens. These were not just ceremonial centers, but the physical framework for a thriving, large-scale society living in harmony with and actively managing a challenging ecosystem. This theory reframes our understanding of power. Controlling people is one thing, but controlling the resources they depend on is the foundation of true, enduring authority. A ruler who could organize the construction of a wall that secured water, fertile land, or prized commodities would command loyalty through guaranteed survival and prosperity. The wall becomes a promise of stability, a communal investment in a more secure and predictable future. It is a declaration that the community has the collective will and skill to bend the environment to its needs, to create order from natural chaos. This perspective invites us to see these ancient lines on the land not as scars of conflict or fear, but as the bold blueprints of civilizations strategically investing in their own longevity. But what if the greatest achievement was not the wall, but the community that built it? A fourth compelling theory suggests we have been looking at the end product, when the true purpose lay in the process itself. This is the unifying project hypothesis, which proposes that these monumental walls served as social glue. The act of construction could forge a shared identity, strengthen cohesion, and cement the authority of leaders, transforming a collection of individuals into a unified society with a common legacy. Imagine the mobilization required. Thousands of people, from laborers to engineers, must be fed, housed, and coordinated. This is not just a construction project, it is a colossal exercise in social organization. Emerging elites or chieftains could leverage this effort to consolidate their power, directing the collective energy toward a single, awe-inspiring goal that everyone could see and touch. The wall becomes a tangible symbol of what the community can accomplish together, a permanent reminder of their shared labor and purpose. Sociologists note that large public works often serve this function, creating a sense of common purpose that transcends individual concerns. The logistics themselves would have required new levels of cooperation and specialization, forcing different clans or family groups to work in concert. There might have been seasonal work festivals, rituals to bless the foundation, or celebrations as each new section was completed. In this light, the wall is less a physical barrier against an external threat and more a social bulwark against internal fragmentation. It provided a non-violent outlet for communal energy, a project that gave meaning, structure, and pride. The finished wall standing on the landscape then serves as the ultimate monument to that newfound unity, its very scale a declaration that this society is organized, capable, and here to stay. So we must ask, did these civilizations build walls to protect themselves, or did they build them to become the kind of civilization that needed and deserved such protection? The project itself may have been the point all along. To truly appreciate a mystery, it helps to first understand a solved one. Hadrian's Wall, snaking across the neck of northern England, represents perhaps the clearest picture we have of an ancient boundary's intent. This was the definitive frontier of the Roman Empire for nearly 300 years. It was a complex military system built of stone, featuring a continuous barrier punctuated by fortified gateways called mile castles, observation towers, and large garrison forts to the south. We have Roman texts that mention its construction, inscriptions left by the soldiers who manned it, and a wealth of archaeological evidence from military gear to the remains of settlements that grew around its gates. Its functions are well supported. It controlled the movement of people and goods. It served as a base for patrols and a deterrent to raids, and it stood as a powerful stone symbol of Roman order against the perceived chaos beyond. It was, in essence, a highly sophisticated border control point. Now hold that clear image in your mind and turn to the Serpent's walls of the Ukrainian steppe. We see similar linear earthworks stretching across the horizon, a monumental human effort, but here the clarity vanishes. There are no contemporary chronicles describing their construction. No inscriptions name the king or tribe that built them. We find few, if any, obvious garrison posts or military settlements directly attached to them. The wall exists, but the entire supporting context, the who, the when, the specific why, is missing. This stark contrast is the key. A wall like Hadrian's comes with a manual, written in stone and text. A wall like the Serpent's walls is just the artifact, a single piece of a puzzle whose other pieces are lost. Without that surrounding evidence, interpretation becomes unmoored. Was it a defensive barrier, a territorial marker, a system to manage herds? All are plausible because we lack the specific historical moment that would rule any of them out. This comparison shows that a wall's purpose isn't inherent in its stones or its soil. It is written in the landscape around it, in the settlements it touched, and in the records of the people who built it. When that context is silent, the wall's true voice becomes a whisper we can only struggle to hear. This chronological fog is one of the greatest obstacles to understanding. Imagine trying to solve a crime without knowing when it happened. You could have the weapon, the location, even a potential motive, but without a firm timeline, you cannot connect it to a suspect or a specific conflict. This is precisely the challenge with so many ancient walls. The Serpent's walls of Ukraine present a perfect example. Scientific attempts to date these massive earthworks have returned a staggering range of possibilities, spanning from the 2nd century to the 10th century AD. That is an 800-year window. Within that vast stretch of time, the landscape of Eastern Europe witnessed the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, the great migrations of Gothic and Hun peoples, the emergence of Slavic tribes, the power of the Khazar Khaganate, and the foundation of Kievan Rus. A wall built in the 2nd century would tell a story of Roman frontier interactions or early tribal territories. A wall built in the 9th century would be a response to entirely different pressures, perhaps the mounted warriors of the steppe like the Pechenegs. Without pinning down the date, we are left with a dozen plausible historical backdrops, and the wall's purpose shifts dramatically with each one. The problem lies in the very science we rely on. Radiocarbon dating is a revolutionary tool, but it has a specific limitation. It measures the age of organic material, like a piece of charcoal or a fragment of bone. If we find that material within an earthwork, we are dating when that wood was grown or that animal lived, not necessarily the moment it was placed into the wall. That timber could have been from a centuries-old tree when it was cut, or it could have been reused from an even older structure. A bone could have been deposited long after the wall was built. For stone walls, the challenge is even greater. The stone itself is millions of years old, so we must date the mortar if it was used or hope to find organic material trapped in its foundation. Many of these structures were not single events but long-term projects. They might have been started by one culture, expanded by another, and then repaired or repurposed by a third centuries later. Each phase adds another layer of confusion, like a manuscript that has been written and rewritten by different authors without clear notation. This means an archaeological team might get 5 different dates from 5 different samples taken along the wall's length, all of them technically correct for the material they tested, but none providing a clear story for the wall as a whole. This lack of a precise anchor in time leaves the structure historically adrift. We cannot confidently say, this wall was built by King X to defend against Tribe Y. Instead, we are left with a ghost of a timeline where the physical monument is clear, but its connection to the living, breathing world that created it remains frustratingly blurred. Our modern instinct to see a wall and think defense is powerful and deeply ingrained. We look at a massive earthwork and our minds, shaped by centuries of recorded warfare and clear national borders, immediately construct a scenario of conflict. We see the high rampart and imagine soldiers standing watch. We see the deep ditch and picture it stopping cavalry charges. This is a logical starting point, but it is also a potential trap. It projects our own world onto the past, a past where the very idea of a boundary might have been profoundly different. Post-procedural archaeologists, a school of thought that emphasizes the subjective nature of interpretation, warn us about this. They argue that every artifact we dig up is seen through the lens of our own time, our own politics, and our own unspoken assumptions. A quote from one such researcher might remind us that, to an ancient society, a line in the earth could be as much about cosmology as it was about security. Think about it. Could a wall built to contain a sacred grove, to mark the edge of a ceremonial ground where only initiates could enter, look structurally identical to a wall built to repel invaders? From an engineering standpoint, very possibly yes. Both would require a clear, imposing barrier. The difference lies not in the stones or the soil, but in the intention, in the stories told about it, in the rituals performed along its length. Our modern perspective is fiercely functionalist. We ask, what did this do? How did it work? What problem did it solve? Ancient minds may have asked different questions. What did this mean? How did it connect us to the ancestors or the gods? How did it make our place in the world right and orderly? Consider our concepts of private property and exclusive territory. These are not universal human constants. Some cultures historically viewed land as a shared resource, with boundaries that shifted with the seasons or were defined by use, not by permanent walls. A massive linear feature in such a landscape might not be saying keep out so much as observe this transition, or this is a place of exchange, or even this is where the world of the living meets the world of the spirits. When we only look for forts and garrisons, we might be blind to altars offering pits or alignment with celestial events that could hint at a non-military purpose. This cultural bias shapes the very questions we ask. If we assume a wall is military, we excavate looking for barracks, weaponry, and signs of battle. And if we find a single arrowhead, we might take it as confirmation, even if it was lost there centuries later. But if we open our minds to other possibilities, we might look for different clues, patterns of pottery that suggest feasting rather than quotidian living, the arrangement of gates that face the rising sun on a solstice, or ethnographic accounts from descendant peoples that speak of the area as a traditional meeting ground. This is not about discarding the defense hypothesis, which is often perfectly valid. It is about recognizing it as one hypothesis among several, and understanding that our first, most instinctive answer is a product of our own time and place. To truly listen to what these ancient walls might be telling us, we must first try to quiet our own modern voices. We must confront the uncomfortable truth that the people who built these monuments might have thought in ways that are fundamentally foreign to us, their reasons woven from a fabric of belief and symbolism that has long since frayed. This makes the puzzle infinitely harder, but also infinitely more fascinating. Even the most perfectly preserved wall stands alone. It is a single sentence ripped from a vast, complex book whose other pages have turned to dust. The landscapes that cradled these structures have not remained frozen for our inspection. They have breathed, shifted, and transformed over the centuries in ways that erase crucial context. Forests have marched over ramparts, rivers have changed their courses, and the very soil has been churned by generations of plows. The wall of Gorgon today runs through wheat fields and modern villages. Its relationship to the ancient towns and supply routes it once connected completely severed. The Amazonian geoglyphs slept under a blanket of dense rainforest for over half a millennium, their builders' villages long since dissolved into the earth. This profound loss of context is perhaps the most crippling obstacle to understanding. A wall without its surrounding world is a riddle without a referent. Where were the settlements it was meant to shield? We can guess, but without finding their foundations, their layout, their size, we cannot know if the wall was a community's desperate last line of defense or a symbolic boundary for a ceremonial center that stood miles away. Where were the roads that led to its gates, the paths that brought traders, farmers, or pilgrims to its threshold? A gate facing an empty field suggests a very different purpose than a gate that opens onto a well-worn highway connecting two populous cities. And perhaps most telling of all, where are the middens? Those ancient trash heaps are archaeological treasure troves. They hold the broken pottery, the animal bones, the lost tools, and the discarded items of daily life. A midden near a wall could tell us if the people living there were soldiers eating standardized rations or families engaged in domestic crafts. It could reveal periods of feast or famine, trade connections through exotic goods, or even the sudden arrival of a new cultural group. Without these surrounding clues, the wall becomes an isolated artifact, a magnificent but silent monument. This forces us to shift our thinking from studying a site to reconstructing an entire landscape. Archaeology is moving beyond the trench and looking at the wider picture: the ancient river channels that provided transport, the forest composition that indicated managed orchards, the subtle rises in the ground that might hint at long-gone dwellings. It is a painstaking process of connecting invisible dots. When we lose that landscape, when farms erase ancient field systems or cities bury old roads, the wall's purpose is set adrift. It becomes a ship floating on an empty sea, its original voyage, its home port, and its destination all forgotten. We are left admiring the vessel's construction, but forever wondering where it was meant to go. Yet the story is not one of permanent loss. The same ingenuity that built these walls is now being directed toward seeing through the veil of time. Our hope for solving these mysteries is no longer confined to a shovel and a brush. It lies in a suite of emerging technologies that act as new eyes for ancient stones. These tools allow us to observe without disturbing, to see the invisible, and to ask questions we never could before. Advanced satellite spectroscopy, for instance, can peer down from space and detect the faintest chemical signatures in the soil. Where a human sees a flat, empty field beside a wall, the satellite might reveal a subtle trail of phosphorus and organic residue, the ghost of an ancient path trodden by countless feet, leading directly to a forgotten gate. This tells us where the traffic was, where people moved, and where we should look next. Meanwhile, artificial intelligence is learning to scan the colossal datasets produced by LiDAR. A human researcher might spend a lifetime analyzing the millions of data points from a single forest scan. An AI can process it in days, identifying patterns, alignments, and potential structures that are utterly invisible to our pattern-seeking brains, which can easily miss the forest for the trees, or in this case, the wall for the individual stones. On a microscopic level, a revolutionary technique called sediment ancient DNA analysis is changing the game. Scientists can now extract genetic material preserved in the soil itself. By sampling the earth at the base of a wall, they can detect the genetic traces of the people, animals, and even plants that were present at the time of its use. Was this a place where horses gathered, suggesting a cavalry post? Or do we find only the DNA of domesticated crops, pointing to an agricultural boundary? This moves us from guessing who might have been there to knowing, with growing certainty, who actually was. And in the air, drones equipped with sophisticated cameras are creating ultra-high-resolution, three-dimensional models of entire wall systems. These are not just pictures, they are perfect, measurable digital twins. Researchers can then use these models in simulation software, virtually repeopling the landscape. They can test sightlines from guard towers, calculate the time it would take a group to move from one fort to another, or model water flow through ancient canals. As digital archaeologists suggest, we are moving toward a future where we can run experiments on the past, testing our defensive, symbolic, or economic hypotheses in a virtual space that respects the actual physical remains. It is crucial to understand that these astonishing tools will not hand us a single, neat, definitive answer on a tablet. They are not truth machines. Instead, they are possibility narrowers and complexity revealers. They will ruthlessly eliminate theories that do not fit the new data, while simultaneously unveiling layers of interaction and purpose we cannot yet imagine. The true purpose of a wall may not be one thing, but a tapestry of functions that shifted with the seasons, the generations, and the ruling dynasty. These new eyes are finally giving us the resolution to see that tapestry, thread by intricate thread. The persistent mystery surrounding these walls does more than frustrate archaeologists. It captivates the human imagination. For every careful academic theory, there exists a constellation of alternative explanations, from ancient alien architects to the remnants of a lost, advanced civilization like Atlantis. Mainstream science often dismisses these ideas, yet their enduring popularity is itself a vital clue. It points to a profound, almost instinctual desire for a grand, unifying narrative. Faced with something as immense and inexplicable as the Serpent's walls or the Amazonian geoglyphs, our minds seek an explanation that matches their scale and awe. A simple boundary marker for cattle feels inadequate. A cosmic landing strip or a bulwark against mythical giants feels more fitting. This is the same impulse that draws us to the Nazca Lines, Stonehenge, or the Great Pyramids. We are not just looking for function, we are looking for meaning that resonates with the monument's grandeur. This tension between established, evidence-based research and boundless speculative wonder is not a weakness in our pursuit of the past. It is a dynamic engine. The popular mystery fuels public fascination, which in turn generates support for scientific exploration. It pushes researchers to ask bolder questions and to communicate their more nuanced, if less sensational, findings more clearly. The alternative theory acts as a provocative thought experiment, challenging conventional wisdom and reminding us that our current understanding is always provisional. In the end, the wall is a physical object, but its mystery is a cultural space, a playground for both the disciplined scientist and the curious dreamer. And it is in that shared space of wonder that these ancient stones truly come alive. But the quest to unravel these mysteries carries a profound responsibility. Who truly owns the story of these ancient walls? Many of these structures are not just relics in a vacuum. They stand on the lands of present-day nations and, crucially, within the ancestral territories of indigenous communities. The scientific drive to dig, date, and decipher can sometimes run headlong into a very different way of knowing the past. For instance, the geometric earthworks hidden in the Amazon may appear to outsiders as fascinating puzzles for archaeological study. Yet for some local tribes, these patterns in the earth are woven into oral histories, part of a living landscape imbued with spiritual significance. Their understanding is not a theory to be tested, but a continuous narrative connecting them to their ancestors. This creates a fundamental ethical question. Does the right to interpret these sites belong solely to the academic holding a trowel, or equally to the community that has preserved stories about them for generations? This extends to physical artifacts removed from the land, items that may hold deep cultural meaning far beyond their material value. The growing movement toward repatriation, returning these objects to their places of origin, is a recognition that heritage cannot be separated from people. Modern archaeology is increasingly learning that the most respectful and often the most insightful research is collaborative. This means working with descendant communities from the very beginning, not just as laborers or informants, but as partners in designing the research questions. It involves listening to oral traditions not as myths to be debunked, but as valuable historical data that offers a unique perspective on the landscape. A project might combine ground-penetrating radar with elder testimony, each method illuminating what the other cannot see. The goal shifts from a lone expert extracting secrets from the ground to a shared journey of discovery that honors both scientific rigor and cultural continuity. After all, solving an ancient mystery loses its meaning if the process damages the living culture that is the direct legacy of those very builders. The wall is not just a line of stones or earth. It is a point where past and present, science and spirit, must learn to meet with mutual respect. Long before archaeologists arrived with their tools, people told stories about the Great Walls. The sheer scale of these ancient barriers seemed to demand an explanation beyond ordinary human effort, so mythology provided one. The immense stone blocks of Mycenaean citadels in Greece were so large that later generations believed only a race of one-eyed giants, the Cyclopes, could have lifted them. The famous walls of Jericho, whose dramatic fall is recounted in the Hebrew Bible, stand as a powerful symbol of divine intervention and the vulnerability of even the mightiest fortifications. These are not just tales, they are a form of ancient interpretation, attempts by people living in the shadow of inexplicable ruins to answer the same question we ask today: who built this and why? When a society encounters a massive, abandoned earthwork snaking across the countryside, a structure with no known history attached to it, the human mind seeks a narrative. The featureless, linear mound becomes a serpent, a dragon, a giant's causeway. Across northern Europe, numerous old linear earthworks are locally called dragon walls or devil's dikes. Could the Serpent's walls of Ukraine have inspired similar legends, their original builders long forgotten, their form slowly morphing into the coiled body of a mythical beast in the stories of those who came after? This process is not about recording literal history, but about making sense of the landscape. A wall that seems to serve no contemporary purpose might be explained as the futile work of a trickster god, or the failed rampart of a defeated army of demons. These myths become a cultural memory, a way of embedding the strange physical artifact into the community's understanding of the world. They mark the site as significant, often sacred or cursed, which can ironically aid in its preservation through taboos. By studying these legends, we gain a different kind of evidence. We learn how the wall was perceived centuries or even millennia after its construction. Was it seen as a protective charm, a malevolent boundary, or the tomb of a hero? The stories reflect the values and fears of the later culture, offering a window into how human relationships with these monuments change over time. The struggle to understand these silent sentinels, it turns out, is a story as old as storytelling itself. A wall's ultimate purpose can be rendered meaningless by a shift in the weather. While we often analyze these structures through the lens of human conflict or ambition, there is a silent, powerful actor in the story: the climate itself. The discipline of paleoclimatology, the study of ancient weather patterns, provides a critical backdrop. Scientists do not read old weather reports. Instead, they examine natural archives. They drill deep into ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica, where each layer of compacted snow, like the rings of a tree, holds tiny bubbles of the atmosphere from thousands of years ago. They study the width and density of tree rings from ancient, preserved timbers, which tell tales of good growing seasons and punishing droughts. They analyze sediment layers from lake beds and ocean floors, where pollen grains and chemical isotopes paint a picture of changing temperatures and rainfall. This data allows us to reconstruct the world in which these walls were built, maintained, and ultimately, often abandoned. Consider the brief life of the Antonine Wall in Scotland. Its abandonment after only a generation is typically framed as a Roman political or military decision. But what if the environment itself turned against the endeavor? Paleoclimate data from this period suggests a cooling trend across northern Europe, often called the Roman climatic optimum, transitioning into a less stable phase. For a frontier force dependent on local agriculture to feed its troops and requiring clear visibility for defense, a shift toward colder, wetter, and foggier conditions could have been devastating. The turf rampart would have been harder to maintain, the land less productive, and the strategic value of holding such an inhospitable outpost would have plummeted. The wall may not have been overrun by enemies, but slowly suffocated by a changing climate that made its operation unsustainable. This pattern repeats across the globe. The magnificent wall of Gorgon, the Red Snake of Persia, required a constant, reliable water supply for its garrison of thousands and for the bricks used in its construction. Its parallel canal is a testament to this need. What if the region experienced a prolonged period of drought? A decline in rainfall would have strained the sophisticated hydraulic system, reduced agricultural output to feed the soldiers, and perhaps even intensified pressure from nomadic groups in the north whose own grazing lands were failing. The wall's collapse might not stem from a single lost battle, but from a decades-long environmental squeeze that eroded the empire's capacity and will to maintain such an expensive frontier. Similarly, the great earthworks of the Amazon are now seen as part of a managed landscape. Their construction and use would have been intricately tied to specific rainfall patterns and river flood cycles. A major, long-term shift in these cycles could have disrupted the delicate balance of agriculture, aquaculture, and settlement that the walls helped organize. The communities might have gradually dispersed, their grand geometric designs slowly reclaimed by the forest, not because of invasion, but because the environmental rules of their world had fundamentally changed. This perspective adds a profound layer to our understanding. It suggests that these monumental efforts to control space and define boundaries were also, in a very real sense, negotiations with the climate. A wall is a statement of order, but it is built in a world of natural chaos. The builders were responding not only to human threats but to environmental ones, the need to manage water, to protect crops from unpredictable weather, or to secure resources in a fluctuating landscape. When we look at a crumbling rampart, we might therefore be seeing the endpoint of a failed negotiation. The climate changed, and the wall, for all its engineering brilliance, became a relic of a past equilibrium. This forces us to view these ancient civilizations not as static entities in a stable world, but as dynamic societies adapting to, and sometimes being overwhelmed by, the powerful and unpredictable forces of the planet they called home. A modern tractor can erase 1,000 years of history in a single afternoon. The very landscapes that once isolated and protected these ancient walls now expose them to new and relentless dangers. The Serpent's walls of Ukraine, those colossal earthen barriers against nomadic empires, now face a quiet, steady enemy, the plow. As agricultural fields expand, these linear earthworks are gradually smoothed away, their contours fading under each successive harvest. In the Amazon, the revelation of the geoglyphs brought not only wonder but a new threat. Once exposed by deforestation, these fragile earthen patterns are vulnerable to being leveled for cattle ranching or damaged by unchecked logging roads. Urban sprawl consumes the outskirts of ancient sites, while looters dig indiscriminately for artifacts, destroying the precise archaeological context that gives objects their meaning. Even climate change plays a role, as increased rainfall and severe weather events accelerate the erosion of already vulnerable stone and soil. These are not relics resting peacefully in a museum. They are living and dying parts of our shared landscape. The fight to save them is a global endeavor operating on multiple fronts. At the highest level, organizations like UNESCO designate sites as World Heritage, a status that offers legal protection and elevates international awareness. This recognition can be a powerful shield, helping to redirect a highway or secure funding for conservation. But the most vital work often happens on the ground, led by local communities and archaeologists. In Scotland, groups work to stabilize the turf remains of the Antonine Wall, battling invasive plant roots that can split ancient stonework. In Iran, preservationists monitor the brickwork of the Wall of Gorgon, documenting cracks and subsidence. Perhaps most inspiring are community-led initiatives where the descendants of the builders themselves become the guardians. In parts of the Amazon, some indigenous groups are partnering with researchers, combining satellite technology with ancestral knowledge to monitor the geoglyphs and advocate for their protection against further clearance. These partnerships recognize that the walls are not just puzzles for science, but part of a living cultural heritage. So we must ask a pressing question: what vanishes when a wall disappears? We lose more than a tourist attraction or a curious feature on a map. We lose a unique dataset about human resilience. Each wall is a concrete experiment in how a society responded to pressure, whether from enemies, the environment, or internal social need. Its construction techniques reveal forgotten engineering solutions. The soil trapped within its layers holds ancient pollen, seeds, and even environmental DNA, a frozen snapshot of a lost world. Its placement tells us how people perceived and moved through their territory. If a wall is destroyed before we can read it with our latest tools, we sever a direct line to those past minds and their ingenious adaptations. This is a race against time, not merely to preserve old stones and mounds, but to preserve the answers they hold to questions we are only now learning how to ask. The oblivion we face is not just physical but intellectual, a permanent silencing of voices from the past just as we develop the ears to hear them. A perfectly preserved clay tablet lies half buried in the shadow of the wall of Gorgon. Its cuneiform script, untouched by time, is a direct message from the Sasanian engineer-in-chief, a complete manual detailing the wall's budget, garrison strength, and strategic intent. For an archaeologist, this is the ultimate fantasy, the discovery that would end centuries of debate overnight. But let's pause this daydream for a moment and ask ourselves a revealing question. What are we secretly hoping that manual says? Would we want it to confirm our most dramatic theories, detailing epic battles against relentless nomadic hordes? Or would we prefer a more enigmatic answer, one that speaks of celestial alignments and rituals to appease the gods of the steppe? This thought experiment is less about the past and more about us, the interpreters. It exposes the narratives we are subconsciously drawn to, the grand stories we wish history would tell. There is a real possibility that such a manual, if it existed, would be shockingly mundane. It might be a dry administrative ledger, listing the monthly barley ration for the 5th cohort, or a decree about toll collections for merchants passing through the northern gate. Part of us might feel a pang of disappointment at such a revelation, as if the wall's physical grandeur demands an equally grand and singular purpose. But that reaction is the entire point. The mystery forces us to engage. The absence of a simple answer compels the military historian to talk to the landscape archaeologist, who must listen to the anthropologist studying kinship patterns. It creates a vibrant, sometimes contentious, space where multiple possibilities can coexist and be tested. This ongoing dialogue is where the real understanding grows, not in the passive acceptance of a single fact. The unknown is a catalyst. It pushes the boundaries of our imagination, inviting us to consider ancient societies as complex, multifaceted entities whose motivations could blend the practical, the political, and the spiritual in ways we struggle to disentangle. If we had that manual, the conversation would stop. The wall of Gorgon would become a solved equation filed away. Its story would be complete, and in that completion, perhaps a little less alive. The enduring wonder of these structures lies not in a secret we have lost, but in the endless conversation they inspire. That conversation between disciplines is no longer a theoretical ideal. It is the essential toolkit for modern discovery. To truly listen to what these ancient walls are saying, we must assemble a team of translators. An archaeologist with a trowel is indispensable, but they are joined by a geologist who can identify the exact quarry source of a stone block, tracing ancient trade routes. A civil engineer examines the mortar composition and load-bearing angles, revealing whether a wall was built for show or for enduring siege. an ecologist analyzes layers of pollen trapped in the soil beside the ditch, reconstructing whether the landscape was open grassland or dense forest when the builders arrived. And a data scientist writes algorithms to process millions of points of LiDAR data, finding patterns of smaller settlements that cluster near the great earthworks, invisible to the naked eye. These specialists do not work in sequence, they work in concert, each finding a piece of a puzzle that no single person could complete alone. Consider the ongoing work in the Amazon. Soil scientists or pedologists are not just looking at dirt, they are analyzing the chemical and physical fingerprints within the earthworks themselves. They have found something extraordinary known as terra preta, or Amazonian dark earth. This is not natural soil. It is a human-made, incredibly fertile soil, engineered by pre-Columbian societies through a long process of adding charcoal, pottery shards, and organic waste. When this dark earth is found in direct association with the geometric enclosures, it transforms our understanding. It suggests these spaces were not just ceremonial or defensive, but were likely centers of intensive, sustainable agriculture. The wall or ditch defined a managed space, a garden, or an orchard enriched by human ingenuity. This one finding from a field far removed from traditional archaeology bridges a massive gap. It connects the physical structure to daily life, to food security, and to a sophisticated understanding of the ecosystem. The wall becomes part of a living, productive landscape. This is the power of the interdisciplinary approach. The military historian's report on gate design is cross-referenced with the climatologist's data on 2-century drought cycles. The anthropologist's model of social hierarchy is tested against the geneticist's findings from ancient DNA recovered from the site. These walls are the perfect focal point for this convergence because they are themselves conglomerations, built from local stone, regional politics, and universal human impulses. They refuse to be categorized neatly into a single academic department. The most promising breakthroughs are now happening at these fuzzy boundaries between fields, in projects where a satellite imagery analyst and a folklorist might sit at the same table, realizing that a pattern of wall alignments corresponds with ancestral stories about the path of a mythical serpent. By speaking multiple academic languages, these collaborative teams are doing more than solving a mystery. They are beginning to reconstruct an entire worldview, one translated fragment at a time. But what happens if the conversation finally reaches a definitive answer? Suppose a sealed archive is unearthed tomorrow, containing the complete engineering logs and royal decrees for the Wall of Gorgon, leaving no room for debate about its military and economic functions. Or imagine a new dating technique proves conclusively that the Amazonian geoglyphs were built within a single generation for a specific agricultural purpose. Would that be a victory or a kind of ending? Certainty provides a profound sense of closure. It satisfies our deep-seated need for resolution and allows historians to write a final, authoritative chapter. The wall's entry in the encyclopedia would be updated, and academic debate would largely move on to other, less settled topics. Yet, in that very act of closing the book, we might sense a loss. The grandeur of these structures is inextricably linked to their silence. Their mystery invites us in, compelling us to project our questions, our imaginations, and our diverse perspectives onto their weathered stones. They become mirrors, reflecting not only the ancient world but our own world's changing ideas about power, community, and our place in the landscape. A wall with a known, singular purpose becomes a monument. A wall whose purpose is contested becomes a living conversation. That conversation, the decades of heated conferences, the passionate amateur theories, the slow accumulation of evidence from disparate fields, is where the past remains vibrantly present. It forces us to remain humble, to acknowledge the limits of our knowledge, and to collaborate across disciplines. The uncertainty is not a bug in the system of history, it is a feature. It reminds us that the past is not a static collection of facts, but a dynamic story we are continually reinterpreting with every new tool and every new generation of thinkers. The moment we think we have the final answer is the moment we stop looking and perhaps stop truly seeing. So while the pursuit of truth is our essential mission, the sustained engagement born from mystery is its own precious reward, keeping the stones from becoming merely stones and ensuring they remain questions etched into the earth. That conversation, however, needs more voices to continue. The story of these walls is not locked away in a university library. It is written across landscapes you can see from your own computer. You have a role to play in this ongoing exploration. The age of the solitary archaeologist in a dusty trench is giving way to a new era of collective discovery, and you are invited. Online platforms now harness the power of curious minds worldwide. Initiatives like Global Explorer train volunteers to scan satellite imagery, flagging potential archaeological sites that professional researchers can then investigate on the ground. A strange linear shadow in a field, a subtle circular pattern in a forest, what you notice over your morning coffee, could lead to the identification of a lost wall segment or a forgotten settlement. This is citizen science in action, a way to contribute to a global effort without ever leaving your home. Your engagement can take many other forms, too. You can support organizations dedicated to preserving these fragile monuments, many of which face threats from modern development and natural erosion. If you have the opportunity to visit one of these sites, doing so responsibly following local guidelines, leaving no trace helps ensure they remain for future generations. Or your journey might be one of deep reading, diving into the rich literature and conflicting theories that make this field so compelling. Every time you learn about these structures, question a proposed theory, or share the mystery with someone else, you become part of the long human tradition of trying to understand our ancestors. You are helping to keep their story alive. The next critical piece of evidence might not be found by a satellite or a shovel, but by a viewer who looks at a familiar landscape with a new, questioning eye. That next discovery, the one that changes our understanding, could very well begin with you. These silent stone and earth barriers stand as a profound reminder of our shared human story, a story filled with as much mystery as it is with recorded fact. Their true purpose eludes us not because the evidence is missing, but because it speaks in too many voices at once. A single wall could be an expression of fear, a declaration of faith, a tool of commerce, and a symbol of unity all at the same time. To demand one simple answer is to misunderstand the complex hearts of the people who built them. This enduring uncertainty is not a gap in our knowledge to be resented, but a vast and open space for wonder. It is an invitation to humility, a call to remember that the past is not a puzzle to be solved once and for all, but a conversation that continues across generations. The historian Will Durant once reflected that civilization is a stream with banks. These monumental walls are those very banks, enduring, often mysterious, and defining the flow of human endeavor. They mark where we chose to shape the world, to say, here we are and here our domain begins. They challenge us to listen more closely, to look more carefully, and to keep exploring. If this journey to the edges of known history has sparked your curiosity, there are many more frontiers to explore. Consider subscribing to join us on our next investigation into the world's greatest puzzles. And we would love to hear from you. What theory about these ancient walls resonates most with you? Share your thoughts and questions in the comments below. Thank you for watching.